Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Money Talk. This is Gregg Somerville. Ordinarily, I'm joined by Craig Snyder, or we have another assortment of guests from time to time, but Craig is not around this weekend, so it's my pleasure to introduce my guest, I think a second-time guest on the show, Karla Levinson. And Karla has an elder care attorney's practice in downtown Wilmington. I'm just going to read the description from her website. Karla went into practice with her father, the late Larry Levinson, in 2007. And since then, she has assisted hundreds of Delaware families with asset protection and long-term care planning, and really enjoys giving families the good news that they have qualified for Medicaid and or veterans benefits. Karla and I have worked with a client recently, and it went very well. I enjoyed meeting her. I've learned a lot during the process of working with this client, and so I thought it'd be helpful to, I often say, Karla, that I know a lot about several different areas of financial planning to either be dangerous, or the good way to put it is I can recognize problems but not solve them. And then elder care and estate planning both fall firmly into that. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Very cool, very cool. So in the way of an introduction, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do, and then I was transition over talk a little bit about your team and how you work together.
Sure.
So what is it that you focus on? Because we ended up with the client that we shared, we ended up starting in one area and it kind of migrated to another area. And so it's not really just one thing that you do, is it?
Right, exactly. So I am an elder law attorney, and when I tell people that, most people just kind of smile and nod. They have no idea what that is.
Right.
So the way I explain it is, we do make sure that things go the way you want them to when you pass away. We do wills, we do trusts, but most importantly, we deal with what happens if you don't die and you get sick. How are you going to pay for it? Do you have everything in place that you need to? And that's kind of our starting point and what we focus on.
So that's a specialty. And do you find, so sometimes I find in different professions that people do a certain thing, but then they kind of say like, oh, I can do that also. Do you find that there are attorneys out there who maybe specialize in one thing and then say, yeah, we can do that? And maybe given a choice, I think most people would rather go to the person who does that same surgery every day, who does that same process every day. And so do you find, because I don't think there's a lot of elder care attorneys around.
Right, exactly. So I do see more and more the dabblers, but you just had the perfect analogy. You want to go to the person who does 10 heart surgeries a week,
right,
not one a month. So yeah, this is all we do all the time.
And you have a team of people. Karla's law firm is growing. She's going to show me a little bit of an expansion that they're working on currently after we finish taping the show. There's several people who are employed by you, and being in that growth phase, talk a little bit about how you work with your team. Like, if I come in, do I see you? Do I see another attorney? What's your sort of process for how you work with your team, and what do other people specialize in, or what do they add to the team?
Sure, that's a great question. So most of my clients who are coming in have never been to an attorney before. So it's a really intimidating thing for a lot of people to come to see an attorney. So as we grow, thankfully, we have the ability to have more and more people on our team to assist. So you actually don't meet with an attorney at first. Everything starts with a phone call. You will talk with Candy, our client intake person, and she's just going to find out what's going on with you. And even when you first come in the office, you're going to meet with a member of the team to explain how we work, so you can get a good fit, good idea of whether this is a good fit for you or not. So
very good. And so how many people do you have employed by you now?
There are 11 of us.
11. So I was low-key teasing Karla early, because when I went to the website, they were all women, and so I'm a big girl power fan. I have two daughters who are very smart and I think are going to do some great things out there, so I'm a big girl power fan. So I asked her, I said, is this firm all about girl power? Because there's no men here. And there is going to be, or is in addition. Okay, there's a man on the premises. All
yes, right. we have a gentleman, Rick, who has just joined us. We're so excited. He's our client concierge. So he's here to assist clients, taking them to the bank, helping them find documents that might be difficult in the process of what we're doing. So he's great, and we're happy to have him.
That's an awesome position. So I'm a solo practitioner, And many times I'll start down the road of doing a financial projection or a financial plan, and it kind of hits this wall where we don't have the proper documentation or the people aren't setting aside the time. So does he actually like go to the houses and like say, hey, we're going to go through the files, or this person died, or I haven't seen this in 20 years?
Yes.
What kind of background does someone like that have?
Great question. So he was a daily money manager before he came here.
What is a daily money manager?
So he would serve as an agent under power of attorney, or as a trustee of trust, or just help people pay their bills, take care of things if they didn't have a loved one who was around to do it.
Okay.
So,
and somebody would hire him and say, like, I'm going to pay you to take care of this little part of our, it's really a business kind of, or the business part of our lives.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. So one of the running jokes I've had with my eldest daughter, who I literally just dropped off at the airport. She's a student at Northwestern, and she's doing a summer research project in Chicago, which is basically just like Northwestern giving you a little bit of your substantial tuition money back so that your kid can mess around in Chicago and do some sort of a study. So hopefully it'll be an interesting study, and she and her friend will have fun in Chicago. But one of the great fights we ever had in the Somerville household was discussing careers with Alexandra. And Alexandra at one point said, like, my wife Lydia is a scientist and I'm a financial advisor, and she's like, all you people do is solve problems for a living. I don't want to solve problems for a living. And I was like, Alexandra, that's kind of like what everybody does. Everybody solves the problems. And maybe you don't want to solve the same kind of problems I solve, or the same kind of problems that your mother solves. But really, everybody solves problems. So my question for you, and I know this could easily, we only have 2 minutes, so it could leak into the next segment. What problems do you solve? When someone comes in here, what they come in here and they say, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed because of this. What problems do you solve for people?
Oh, that's a great question. So in a nutshell, I would say I solve the same problem for every family, but it's different for every family, which makes it so interesting. I help them pay for their long-term care costs without going broke. Okay.
So either you're protecting money for a spouse who's going to live longer than the person who either has passed away or is likely to pass away or or whatever, or you're protecting an estate for the next generation so that it doesn't get eaten up by the thing. So when you pivot from that, okay, so somebody comes in and they're like, hey, I'm considering this, should I do this? And they don't do that. Then there are some other things that you can do. You can pivot to an estate plan, or you can, so that's what happened in the case that we've talked about. So you can pivot from there to say, hey, we've explored this option. Some aspects are appropriate, some aspects aren't. So we can pivot and do some of the other things that are sort of, I don't want to minimize it by saying more standard, but they are sort of more standard, like a regular will. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, like I said, every family is different, and unless you have no money, you're always going to have several options. So, I see it as my job as to give the client the options and talk through the pluses and minuses, and then they make the decision of what makes the most sense for them.
And is that mostly with Medicare, Medicaid, or both? And again, I think we might leak into the next segment here.
Okay.
Do you do Medicaid?
Medicaid, veterans benefits, we look at avoiding probate. If someone has an estate tax issue, we're not helping them.
So it's not Medicare, it's Medicaid mostly is what you're working with. Okay, we've got lots more questions. We're going to focus a little bit about changes in the law, maybe changes in the administration, how that might affect some of what you're trying to do, and talk more with Karla Levinson in just a moment. Welcome back to Money Talk. Gregg Somerville, usually along with Craig Snyder, but Craig is on vacation this week, so I'm joined by Karla Levinson from the Elder Care Practice. You're down on King Street in downtown Wilmington, so I'm out in Hocassin, just everything within a mile of my house, which is good and bad, but how do you like being down here?
I love it. So I'm a native Wilmingtonian.
Okay.
I live in the city. My son goes to preschool across the street from my office, so if you're in your 1 mile radius in Hocassin, I'm
Beautiful.
in my 1 mile radius here. And I like to be supportive of downtown. It's getting getting better. So
I think, I don't know what the math looks like, but if they could somehow get rid of that wage tax, I think a lot of people would come down here.
it's a killer. It's a killer.
It must raise a lot of money, and like I say, I don't know the numbers behind it and the cost benefit, but you have to pay somebody more than they make somewhere else. So it's either shared or you're absorbing it, one of those two things, because the talented people you have, I'm sure, have options.
Right. And I also pay for their monthly parking.
Oh my gosh,
parking.
Is that and that's taxable? Somewhere that gets taxed, right? Or is it? Or I don't know. You have your business people. Okay.
My sister is my bookkeeper.
Okay.
So
her job's to keep you out of trouble. Well, since you're a Wilmington native, did you watch the debates last night?
I didn't.
Okay.
I was at a concert in Philadelphia.
Oh, well, that's better. That's better. Ariana Grande was 2 nights ago.
Oh, okay.
So I know it wasn't Ariana Grande.
No.
We're taping on Friday morning. But very good. Well, I thought Joe's had better outings.
I'll
just
I heard.
say that. I'll say Joe's had better outings.
Yeah.
I think as it thins down, maybe he'll get his game going a little bit, and we'll see what happens. But when it comes to that actually brings up, and I don't even know if this affects Medicaid very much, but we had Brad Arnold from Limestone Pension Associates on, and he was talking about plan design, retirement plan design, and there's some legislation coming down the pike called the Secure Act. And I don't remember if it has anything to do with Medicaid, but whether it's the Secure Act or whether it's a potential change in administration, whether it's, and again, I know you're focused more on Medicaid, but Medicare for all, phasing out of certain insurance companies. And the way I proceed on this stuff is, look, you have to play by today's rules, and you have to just kind of go forward based on today's rules. But I have a little piece in my mind that's like, what might it look like if this happens, just to try to mentally get ready for it. And in a rare circumstance, maybe there's some things you can actually do to get ready for it. But do you see anything on the horizon that might affect you in terms of any of that stuff?
So from a Medicaid perspective, I don't. And of course, I watch that like a hawk.
Sure.
When I first started practicing in 2007, there was a major Medicaid overhaul.
What year was that?
2007.
Okay.
So the legislation, I think, was passed in 2005, but in Delaware, it was implemented in 2007.
And was that was an expansion, right? Was it a Medicaid expansion or no?
So they were trying to make it harder for people to do Medicaid planning. So they changed the 3-year look back to a 5-year look back, and some other things. So did
they grandfather in what you had already done up to that point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They had I can't remember what the date is, but there's a specific date where the old law applies and then when the new law applies.
And since then, it's kind of been hands-off Medicaid.
It has.
Wasn't there a prescription drug expansion of the Medicaid, or is that just state by state? Some states do it and some states don't.
I don't know, because I don't deal with the prescription drug piece.
Okay.
I do long-term care Medicaid is kind of
right.
what I'm dealing with. So, I can't speak to that. I will say, if we're talking about looking in the future, and so I can just look to what's happened in the past, to think about the future. And when that Medicaid law change happened, it was a big overhaul. Everyone was just devastated. This is going to be awful for people, and you just got to work with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
For a big change that happened in October of 2018 was they did overhaul VA benefit law.
Okay.
They changed the regulations. It's called improved pension with aid and attendance as a VA benefit that's available to a lot of people that we would be applying for. And they had these proposed regulations for years. And
was it an improvement to benefits or less benefits or just a change?
It was a change. It was a clarification of some things. It was making a few things stricter. But they only gave us, we knew it was coming, but no one knew when it was going to be finalized.
Okay.
When it was finally finalized, we only had 30 days notice before it went into effect.
So your planning cycle, talk a little bit about that. What is your plan?
Thankfully, we were able to get their applications in before that 30-day deadline. But it's caused a lot of havoc. I mean, the VA doesn't even understand the new rules yet. So
Right,
it's like
right.
taking a very long time to process the applications.
Got it. What's your views on long-term care insurance and the landscape as I understand it? And I'll tell you just briefly kind of how I think about it in a general sense.
Mm-hmm.
But the landscape is that fewer and fewer insurers are providing it. It's getting more and more expensive. It turns out to have been, at least for the policies that they've written over the past 15 years or so, if they've been writing them that long, not a great bet for insurance companies, probably due to diseases like Alzheimer's disease and long duration diseases. And the way I've looked at it, I have a long-term care policy for myself and my wife, and I thought that would lead to me writing a lot more. But I don't find that many places where it's appropriate. And the way, less than $1 million, it seems like it's too big a lean on income for a good policy for someone who's planning for retirement. Over $3 million, it feels like maybe you're better off self-insuring because you're only protecting maybe $600,000 or $700,000 if that's the maximum. And then maybe in that $1 to $3 million range, but it's still a pretty big lean on income. And then there are some more creative products, I guess, that I've been meaning to learn a lot more about, like MoneyGuard and things like that. Now, I don't think you or anybody associated with you sells any that type
I'm not
of insurance.
licensed to sell insurance.
But is that how do you think about insurance? Because people must ask you about it.
They do. So I tend to agree with you. I'm not a financial advisor, so I don't, I am not qualified to crunch those numbers. But what I see, just to kind of piggyback on what you said, is so because these insurance policies are so expensive, what I do see people doing is insuring themselves, but only partially.
Right.
And at that point, it almost seems like kind of a waste because, you could apply for Medicaid and get kind of the same benefit that you're getting. Right. So I don't know. I kind of agree with you. It's not ideal.
Right. It's good to have, but the decision to buy it, I'm just not sure. It's tough to make that decision one way or the other.
What's your coverage that you have? Do you have?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's a really good plan.
Mm-hmm.
But it's. I want to say for both of it, it's like $7,000 or $8,000 a year. Yeah. And one of my tiebreakers was that a big chunk of it, because I'm self-employed, was tax deductible.
Oh, there you go.
So pre-tax dollars helped me get there. And honestly, I thought once I wrote it that I'd write a lot of policies and that I would pay for my policy by all the commission I would get on the policies that I was writing. And I sold my mom one before she passed away.
Did she use it?
Well, I was having a very bad month, and I really need. No, I'm only kidding. No, she actually got sick, and she had lung cancer and passed away a little suddenly. But yeah, so we didn't use that. So no, it's an interesting dilemma, and we will keep exploring it, and maybe I'll do more research and ask you again next time. So we mentioned gender earlier in reference to your Girl Power firm with Rick. Girl Power plus Rick. And one of the articles I was reading this week is that there is a gender gap in retirement savings. According to an article in Motley Fool, single women between the ages of 60 to 64 are estimated to have a savings shortfall that is more than $37,000 greater than their male counterparts. And I bring that up for a couple reasons, is that one of the things that I run into a lot is that one spouse is kind of handling everything. And in an ideal world, I think it's good that somebody takes the lead, because somebody has to dig up the statement. Somebody has to have a really good understanding of what you're trying to do. But when the other spouse is not involved at all, I think that can be a real problem. Now, we're coming up to the end of the segment, so I think I'll kind of run this question into the end of the segment and let you start off the next segment talking about it. But my guess is that you see a lot of situations where someone comes in here and somebody passed away and they're like, I have no idea what anything is. And maybe we can give people a gentle reminder at the top of the next segment that even if it's just a meeting once in a while, get the spouse involved to come and at least get the lay of the land and have somebody, whether it's somebody like me or somebody like Karla, to dig in there. And I don't know if maybe you have an anecdote or anything that would back that up. Yes. But when we come back in a minute, we'll talk more about that with Karla Levinson. This is Gregg Somerville from Somerville Investments. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Money Talk. Gregg Somerville along with Karla Levinson from Levinson Law Firm. Is that what it's called?
Sure.
The Levinson Law Firm.
The Levinson Firm, yep.
And the Levinson Firm. And she's got a team of people. And just reiterate what your main purpose is, what the main problem you solve for people. Because some people jump in at the beginning of the show, other people coming out of church. So talk a little bit about that.
So I'm an elder law attorney, so my focus is helping clients with long-term care concerns and making sure that they're able to pay for their long-term care costs without going broke.
Awesome. And at the end of the last segment, we talked a little bit about both spouses being involved, and I would even extend that to the kids being involved. Like, I work with a lot of people my age, I'm 57, and they have kids who are in the mid-20s, and I always suggest to them, hey, set up a little Roth IRA and have them come in, even if it's not with me. We can talk a little bit about how to think about finances. But what I run into sometimes is somebody who's passed away and the other spouse doesn't know anything about it. And we were going back a little bit back and forth a little bit during the break, that sometimes it's the husband who doesn't know anything and sometimes it's the wife who doesn't know anything. But it's better if both know some things about your financial situation.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the extreme examples, Greg, like you said, it's usually one spouse or the other who's taken the lead with the finances. And if, what I see are one spouse gets Alzheimer's, that was the spouse who was taking care of the bills for 50 years. Yep. And now all of a sudden this, poor spouse has never written a check before.
Yikes. Oh my gosh.
They're 80 years old, it's tough. And that's to add on the stress of having a sick spouse.
Now, I would have guessed usually there's a kid around, but the kid might not be local. There might not be a kid. The kid might not be local. And then that's
even more heartbreaking.
So is that what Rick's going to do?
Well, so that's what Rick used to do in his prior life as a money manager. I would call him and say, hey, Rick, I have a client with no family. Can you be the agent?
Okay.
Family, I look at this as a family issue. So
right.
I encourage kids to be involved because without another support person, it's really hard.
Right.
Even if it's not a kid.
Gotcha.
A friend, family friend, someone.
It's always a good idea to, even if somebody's new talking to me, people think I'm going to be offended if they bring someone to a meeting. I love it. It's my favorite thing in the world because it's like everything will be much more clear. And if they leave the meeting and two people heard two different things, they're going to send an email or call and say, hey, they thought this and they thought this. Because communication, as we all know, is never perfect. Okay, I have a weird question that's on my radar because I have 3 different continuing education obligations that I'm chipping away at. I have like my Delaware insurance license, I have my certified financial planning, and I have my in-house coastal advisors. So I'm just kind of chipping away at all these. I have my iPad, I bring it everywhere. Do you have different do you just have to do your attorney continuing education? Can you do it on computer? Is it all in person? Is there an elder care designation that you have? Like, what's all that stuff about?
Sure. So it varies from state to state. So Delaware is a very strict state. So we have continuing education requirements. We have general requirements, but then we also have a certain number of ethics hours that we must take, and we report every 2 years. Also, they require some of the CLE, we call it CLE,
right,
to be in person live.
Okay.
So you can't just
right,
go at the last minute and just watch a ton of videos.
And it's multiple choice, and you can usually I try to read a lot or most of this stuff, but you can get by without really reading every single word and agonizing over it. Right. So in person is probably a little more effective.
Yes, yeah. As far as the elder law piece, though, there's no requirement. It's really just up to me. So I have to, it's my responsibility to stay up on it. So I usually end up having way more CLE credits than I need because I go to conferences
Yeah, at the Financial Planning Association conference, which I've probably gone to a few times. It doesn't seem to work scheduling wise, but I'm always glad I went. But they have like a buzz. Whenever you check into a place, they zap it, and then they computerize your CE. And it's a better way to get it. It really is. I think you retain more of it, and also kind of fun to be in a room with people, an expert. You can do more Q&A and things like that. So I came in today, and Karla had another obligation early in the morning, and it was a webinar where she addressed some of the common pitfalls. So what I'd like to do is piggyback a little bit on the webinar, which was more, you mentioned, for financial professionals.
Right.
But I think probably some of that is applicable to individuals out there, whether it be on elder care or on estate planning. And I have some pitfalls that I'll suggest if you don't say them, or I can throw them out there and you can comment on them however you want to do it.
Throw them out and I'll comment and then add.
How about an old will? You ever run into wills from like 25 years ago? And
those are like, you meaning it's not in line with what they want currently?
Well, that could be one thing.
Okay.
That could be one thing that a lot of plot has unfolded on the TV show that is your life.
Yeah.
So the characters have changed and the relationships have changed. But that's what's going to stand. That's what's going to determine everything. So,
well, what I will say...
How often, here's a different way to put it. How often do you think somebody needs to update their will, time-wise?
Time-wise for a will, to me...
Is it event-driven?
That's the most... Yeah, it's event-driven.
Okay.
And it's actually the most... I do have people come in with 30-year-old wills, and I say, it's fine. It doesn't need to be updated. Especially if you're married and you have kids and you want everything to go equally.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Right.
What I do see that people don't understand, and you can speak to this as a financial professional, I think a lot of times people don't understand that if you have joint accounts, beneficiary designated accounts, it doesn't matter what your will says.
And that would be sort of a titling issue.
Yes.
So there are advantages to having those types of accounts. So if you have a joint tenants account, if I have one with my wife and I die, she's going to get everything and it's not going to go through probate, which there's fees attached to probate.
Exactly.
And also the probate stuff becomes public, right?
Yes.
And does the other stuff become public or no?
No.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And retirement accounts passed by beneficiaries, so that's outside the probate law.
Yes.
So one of the other mistakes that I have down there is updated beneficiaries.
Exactly. That's
and
exactly.
So if you get divorced and you have an old 401k from a job you had in your 20s, the person you least want to get the money might get that money, and that's
yes.
I've run into that situation.
Yeah. I run into it a lot with kids because I have older clients who add their one kid to the account, and maybe there's three, and they don't understand. It goes 100% to the one kid who's on the account. It doesn't go evenly among the three kids. Yeah, that
can't be good. So, what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen? That's about all I have.
So that we talked about will and stuff like that. Big one is power of attorney.
Okay.
So, if you have no other document, I urge people to please have a power of attorney in place. Again, because of what I do, I have clients come in. They've had dementia for 10 years. They can't sign a document anymore. They have no power of attorney in place, so that your family can't access your money, and your only alternative is to go to court and get a guardianship.
So if two people are fine, they should, like a husband and wife, I should have a power of attorney for my wife, and my wife should have a power of attorney for me?
Absolutely, because if you, heaven forbid, get in a car accident tomorrow and your wife doesn't have a power of attorney for you, she can't access your retirement accounts.
Wow. Okay. That's scary. What other pitfalls?
Not everyone needs to see an elder law attorney. Like we talked earlier, I'm a specialist. But I would say if you there's certain kind of triggers for looking at this kind of stuff that we're talking about. If you have a dementia diagnosis or Alzheimer's diagnosis, Parkinson's, MS, anything like that, you're statistically going to need long-term care. You're a lot more likely to need it.
Right.
So that would be a time to start looking more closely at this stuff.
And the earlier you start to look at your options, the more benefit you can add, or the more value you can add. And I'm not talking about value making people feel warm and fuzzy and that stuff's taken care of. I'm talking about value like dollars, the earlier you start certain clocks ticking, the more money you're going to save and put into your pocket.
Yeah.
A quick one, which may again lead into the next segment. That's my specialty. I ask questions that lead into the next segment. That might be either just an accident, which is really what it is, or maybe it's a sophisticated radio technique to keep people tuned in. But when I was in your waiting room, I saw several books that kind of talk about some of the issues that we're touching on here. Is there one or two books that jump out at you as if somebody wanted to learn more about this and maybe prepare for a meeting or get it in conjunction with a meeting? Anything jump out at you?
The 36-hour day I have out there.
Okay, we're going to be back in just a minute. The name of that book, that is one of the ones that I picked up, the 36-hour day. So I want to ask you what that title means, too, when we come back. So Gregg Somerville, Karla Levinson, back in a minute. Welcome back to Money Talk. We don't often get breaking news on Money Talk, but as I asked at the end of the last segment what books Karla recommends, and she mentioned the 36-hour day, which I want to get back to that title. But then during the break, she mentioned that Karla also has a book, and it's called The Family Estate Planning and Elder Law Guide. And I've only thumbed through it for a couple minutes, but it looks like it answers a lot of the questions that we're talking about in a lot more detail than we can do on a 40-minute show. Talk a little bit about how this book came about, and then we'll go over to the other books that we were talking about.
Sure. So the book that I just published is actually in collaboration with about 8 other elder law and estate planning attorneys from across the country. We're in a group together. We meet quarterly. So we got together with this book, had an editor sort of compile all our content, and it's a very reader-friendly guide to just basic estate planning, and then also kind of this asset protection stuff that we've been talking about.
Do you guys meet someplace fun?
It sounds fun, but it's
you don't get to do anything.
We don't leave the hotel. So we meet in Orlando.
Okay.
Every quarter in the airport hotel. There's a hotel in the airport. Like you walk off the plane into the
That's
hotel.
not good. No, that's not good. We're our coastal advisors. We do a conference. It's mostly to get everybody better for compliance and that kind of thing, but it's 3 days. It is also in Orlando, but I think we're leaving I think we're going to a real hotel. Yeah, nice. I think there might be a small revolt if we ended up doing it the way that you do it. So the 36-hour day. So the name of Karla's book is The Family Estate Planning and Elder Law Guide, and it looks awesome. So the 36-hour day, what's the title of that mean?
So it just deals with the fact that if you have Alzheimer's, dementia, you don't really have a concept of time, space.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh gosh. And any other books jump to mind?
Not at the moment. I'll have to get back to you. It's so, these days it's a lot of articles and, stuff online that we see, kind of more snippets. But the 36-hour day is a good one.
Cool. Anything else you want to cover about estate planning or elder law, or anything else jump to mind? Because I have some other sort of financial things that I was going to touch on that kind of broadens the thing a little bit.
Yeah.
So one of the things I pulled this week, there's a guy I follow named Steve Burns on Twitter, and he talks about the 10 most satisfying personal finance achievements that somebody can have out there. And I think financial planning is relevant for everybody, whether they're starting out or dealing with elder care, but these are more for somebody who would be more starting out. And one of them, no credit card debt. Knowing that you have 0 credit card debt on the cash to pay, or the cash to pay it off monthly, is very liberating. You can now invest money for returns instead of having compound interest on the debt work against you. No car payments. Being either having your home paid off or having the ability to pay off your home. Having no debt. Having an emergency fund. Having a big retirement account. Having cash flowing assets. A cash flowing asset pays you while you're sleeping after you build or create it. No financial pressure. The reduced stress from not having to make a big mortgage payment, car payment, or financial independence from a job. So those are kind of the phases that some people go through over the course of their lives. When somebody comes in here and they're setting up a plan, do you get people in here who are like in more trouble than they thought on some of these areas, like where they're either unaware or not? Or do people mostly have a general idea of where they are by the time they come and see you?
So we actually do a very detailed, like I said, triage before we have clients come in. So if a client is in really bad shape, we usually can't help them. There's not anything we can do for them, so I don't see those clients a lot. What I do see, though, is individuals who have a long-term care issue and they've been helping their kids out and they don't have a lot of money for themselves to begin with. So that is the most common, I would say, financial mistake that I see.
It's funny because that is a choice people have, especially with the opioid crisis. I think that's really hit home a lot, where people are kind of gutting their retirement plans and doing that. That's like so there's kind of 2 aspects, well, at least 2, of financial planning and estate planning. There's kind of like, I think most people generally know what the right things to do are. We can argue whether it should be 60% stocks or 80% stocks. We could argue about what the best way to get that exposure is. But there's kind of like a set of things that we know we're supposed to do that most professionals would agree on. But then there's this whole sort of behavioral piece. And for us, it's like not selling when the stock market goes down a lot and you get scared. And I think another behavior thing that you're talking about is not sacrificing your. Sometimes it's spending too much money on your kids for an opioid addiction, but sometimes it might be spending too much money on your kids for other things, whether it's camp or private school. And you really have to maintain some balance between those two things. And that's a hard thing to do because you're not there making those decisions, and it's buying things and spending money is a very emotional thing. Like, how do you get people to change their behavior? Is it just an uphill battle?
It's an uphill battle. The only time I can really get people to change is when they're in that crisis situation. So if
they have to feel pain.
They have to feel so much pain when I have to tell them, because you gave your son, because you were paying your son's mortgage because he's unemployed now, you are going to have to pay out of pocket to the nursing home for 6 months longer than you would have otherwise.
And that's if you told them beforehand not to do that, or you just
they come see me and they say
it's already been done.
It's been done. The money's gone, because it's been spent, and that's an issue. So
one of the pieces of the puzzle sometimes, as you and I have explored the case that we worked on together, was that you have to hand over control of some of your assets to some third party, and it's the nature of a lot of this stuff is that it has to be irrevocable. It has to be taken out of your hands completely in order for Medicaid to make the payments. Have you run into situations where that's kind of backfired, or is that pretty rare? Like where you find the person you trust most in the world, you put everything in their hands, and then either bad faith occurs or not following through, or what about if that person gets sued and is that subject to their thing? How do you protect against that?
Sure, great question. Thank goodness I have not had a bad faith situation. Thank goodness. But we talk a lot beforehand before we do it, and sometimes based on the family dynamic, I say, it would be great if we could do this to save, set a lot of money aside, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense if we don't have a trusted person. I have had situations where family members, like kids, start fighting with each other. In that case, thankfully, we can remove the kids as the decision makers and put a neutral third party in. There's provisions in the document to do that.
So the neutral third party would be another individual? Is it ever an institution?
It can be an institution, but it's usually like a daily money manager, like a RIC that I talked about before. But there's a handful of businesses in Newcastle County that'll serve in that capacity.
And who generally has the power? So Joe and Fred are fighting over it, and is that you?
I do name myself. We in Delaware, there's this a trust protector you're allowed to name in the document.
Okay.
It has to be a disinterested person.
Right.
So I do name myself.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be me. It
right.
can be anyone, but
it's you at your firm. It's not anyone else at your firm either. It's you.
It is me.
Okay. Well, that's so no bad faith. And you've done, how many cases do you think you've done?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah,
a lot.
And no bad faith. That's kind of a miracle.
It is a miracle, and I had lunch with another attorney a couple months ago, and he did have an irrevocable trust go bad
for personal reasons.
Yeah.
And what about protection if that person gets sued? Is it because it's a trust? Is it protected?
Yeah, thanks for asking. That's one of the pluses of putting your money in an irrevocable trust rather than just gifting it to your kids. The money in the trust is creditor protected, divorce protected, bankruptcy, all that stuff.
Very good. Well, hey, our show is winding down to the end. We're going to talk a lot more next week about interest rates and the stock market. June was a very good month, so your statement should look pretty good when you get them this month, but who knows what next month will look like. That's not a prediction, just a comment on how this year has gone so far, the ups and downs. I know that last month didn't feel great at the end of the month, but we'll talk more about that. In the meantime, if you want to reach me, SomervilleInvestments.com. If you want to reach Karla, what's the best number to reach you at? Or just Google Karla Levinson, Elder Care?
Yeah, 656-3393 is the number.
And if you forget Karla's last name, or if you just need Elder Care, hit my website. I can get you in touch with Karla. Thanks so much for doing the show. And go get her book, The Family Estate Planning and Elder Law Guide. Congratulations, and thanks for doing the show.
Thanks.
Cool. Back next week on Money Talk.